The following episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.
Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. A word to Normie, affluent suburban Democrats. Leftist grubby populism is rising, and we won't blink first. Here's a Slate article, Bernie or Bust Voters Have a Point, by Lily Loofborough. This is almost a month old, but it's still very good, so I want to make sure that you understand what Lily is trying to posit here. I'll also say that Lily doesn't seem to be coming at this from the place of a Bernie or Buster, but more from an innocent bystander perspective. But you, dear listeners and viewers, know that I don't come from that perspective. Although I'm not a Bernie or Trumper, I am absolutely a Bernie or Buster. So I'll just let you know up front, if you're new to the show, that's where I'm coming from. Bernie or Bust, the stance that the senator supporters will vote for Sanders or no one at all has been widely regarded as aggressive, counterproductive, and totally at odds with the senator's actual message. So let's correct one thing right from the beginning. Bernie or Bust also could mean voting third party. It also could mean leaving the line for President blank and voting for down-ballot candidates who are truly progressive. Not voting at all is only a possibility if there are absolutely no progressive candidates for whom to vote. As long as it's possible to vote for even one candidate who's truly a progressive, regardless of whether they are viable or not, it's our duty to vote for those candidates. It's hard to know exactly how big the movement is. The contingent is certainly loud and obnoxious online, but it's hard to gauge the extent to which that strategy has penetrated. A January Emerson poll showed that Sanders supporters are among the most likely to defect, whereas no Buttigieg or Warren supporters said they wouldn't vote for the Democratic nominee if their candidate didn't win. 16% of Sanders supporters said they wouldn't vote for anyone but Sanders, and 31% said it would depend on the nominee. Those numbers were only 10 and 14% for Buttigieg and Warren. But of course, polls are imperfect instruments. Speaking to New Hampshire Bernie supporters, my colleague Ruth Graham found that most were more than willing to line up behind whichever candidate, though one said he was sufficiently concerned about Iowa that he might not. Well, dear listeners and viewers, there are a lot of other things to be concerned about since Iowa. Still, the Bernie or Busters, small as they may be, or large as they may be, have spun their position into an argument for why others should vote for Bernie Sanders too, regardless of the platform they prefer. As efforts in political persuasion go, this contingent puts forward an openly hostile argument. Sanders is the only electable candidate, they suggest, not just because of his policies, but because of the single-mindedness of his followers. The reason you should vote for Sanders is that we won't vote for anyone else. You don't want Trump to win again, do you? The missing part of this story is the Bernie or Trump voters in swing states. So even if Bernie or Bust voters are seemingly pugilistic, it's also possible that they're just sounding the alarm and warning you that the Bernie or Trump voters are the real threat that all of us should be aware of. If you've been a follower of the Bernie or Bust show, you know that the Bernie or Trump voters in swing states number about 1.5 million, and they get a double bite at the apple by voting directly for the Democratic opponent. They denied Hillary last time, and they're poised to deny Biden again this time. It's a fact, Jack. Yes, it sounds like ugly hostage-taking. Not a brilliant persuasive strategy, but a crude, ego-boosting exercise for a group of leftists who can't resist the impulse to lord some power over an electorate that doesn't normally consider them relevant. But that's exactly what makes it so normal, even understandable in a depressing we're all human sort of way, because the truth is this: every threat these Sanders stands are explicitly making is one the venerated centrist swing voter makes implicitly and isn't judged for. The centrist never even has to articulate this threat. The media narrates it for him. What does the swing voter want is the kind of question that rescues this brand of voter from owning or even admitting any moral consequences at all. The question is framed as sensible, and so is its subject. The swing voter, which, let's be clear, is diminishing in this political landscape, is typically treated as the antithesis of a Bernie stan, as a rational and passionless subject, as if contemplating just not voting in an election were a morally neutral choice. That the swing voter is arguably worse than the Bernie or Bust crew, and that in lieu of just staying home and not voting at all, he might actually vote for the other guy doesn't even register. Well, dear readers and viewers, we're trying to get it to register. That's how accustomed we all are to being held hostage to the centrist concerns. As for leftists, who are undeniably real, well, the democratic machine has never wondered what they thought. It's simply taking them for granted. After all, who else are they going to vote for? Who else indeed? One of many disorienting factors in this election cycle is the fact that the left is more popular and more viable than it has been in a long, long time. They have not one but two exciting candidates. Well, with Elizabeth leaving the race, we're down to one exciting candidate, and both are offering policies closer to what leftists actually want than most presidential contenders in U.S. history have. This means, amusingly enough, that the centrist swing voter has been decentered in political conversation. Those who remain, and there are still quite a few, aren't used to that. Neither are the political narratives media organizations are used to telling, which largely depend on lovingly parsing the swing voters' desires without in any way blaming them for the compromises pleasing them means for the rest of the electorate. The very early strength of Buttigieg and Klobuchar suggests that these are voters in search of a candidate, and media coverage can't help but reflexively fixate on their importance. It's simply the case that a demographic accustomed to being minutely tended to and having its feelings scrupulously monitored isn't getting quite as aggressively courted this time, even if cable news networks can't adjust. Whether 2020 heralds a political revolution or not, this at least is a genuine upset. There's another consideration here too. Because folks at the center tend to be wooed by multiple candidates, they're used to having options and they're used to the experience of their vote determining who ends up with the nomination. This means that they usually like the candidate they vote for in the primary and in the general. Not so for leftists, who get to merely tolerate the candidates they end up having to vote for in order to mitigate the damage from a worse result. Now, with Sanders' New Hampshire victory confirming that he's the one with the best shot at winning this thing, the reverse might obtain. For the first time, it might be voters in the middle, not leftists, who have to hold their noses and vote for candidates they don't like who barely acknowledge them. So what I'd like to say after Super Tuesday is that it's shaping up to be a dead heat between Biden and Bernie. And what we have to understand is the Bernie to Trump voters in swing states make it necessary for us all to come to our senses now and realize that Bernie is the only candidate who even remotely could be considered to be a unity candidate. The grubby populist leftists will not vote for Biden, period. And there are enough of them, enough of the Bernie or busters with them to ensure that you won't get Biden. Normie Dems, you won't get Biden. It's a fact that the corporate media won't tell you. It's a fact that even lefty pundits won't tell you, but it's a fact nevertheless. I suppose there's a model of human nature somewhere that says a person who finally gets a taste of consideration from a society that's shown him contempt will always behave decently and proportionally, remembering what it was like to be at the bottom. In practice, we know better. A little bit of power in the hands of people who have never had any is going to tempt at least some of them to use it badly, often in precisely the way it was used against them. Plenty of Bernie's stands are failing that test right now. But it's clear too why some Sanders supporters still feel hard done by, even if their candidate is winning, and are exerting what leverage they have in angry response. Many of their concerns are legitimate. You Normie Dems, pay attention. The more information we get about Iowa, the easier it is for suspicious supporters to raise their eyes at the data handling disaster that deprived Sanders of anything like a clear victory narrative. Add to that the Super Tuesday garbage. And the proclivity for low information, affluent Normie Dems to get all of their news from corporate news and then to jump to obey them. Much of the media's subsequent coverage of Sanders, particularly his victory in New Hampshire, has been no less baffling. Sanders is now undeniably the frontrunner. No, right now, Joe Biden is undeniably the frontrunner. That should have been the story. Instead, his win has repeatedly been narrated as a failure or setback or defeat. No wonder Sanders supporters find it suspect. It is. Sanders' stands aren't the only ones losing all sense of proportion. If last week is anything to go by, TV anchors seem to be melting down over Sanders' surge, what with Chris Matthews, may he rest in peace, implicitly comparing the senator to Fidel Castro and saying a victory for the Reds might have meant his own execution, and Chuck Todd approvingly sharing a quote from a conservative site calling a Jewish candidate's supporters digital brown shirts. This last was so far beyond the pale that one fails to understand how Chuck Todd remains on the air without at the very least offering an apology. Sanders' most aggressive supporters have felt like they had to speak up against anti-Bernie because no one else would. Yes, that has made them strident, unpleasant, and off-putting. It may be a comfort to them that they aren't the only ones noticing how Sanders is being narrated anymore. Even Margaret Sullivan at the Washington Post is writing about the anti-Bernie phenomenon, and voters are noticing too. Yesterday, MSNBC aired footage of an interview with a very polite, undecided voter who decided to vote for Sanders. When pressed as to why, she finally told them she was sick and tired of how negatively MSNBC had been covering him. Let me insert some good coverage from Mehdi Hassan on how things are shaping up for this coming Tuesday.
I would just briefly, if you don't mind, respond to Barbara Boxer earlier about Joe Biden. This argument, this is not really about Bernie Sanders now. Biden's now the front runner.
Yes.
You can hate Bernie Sanders all you want. You can think he's a crazy communist who can't win in America. Fine. But the reality is, if you turn to Joe Biden and say, well, he's the safe candidate, I think you need to do a lot more soul searching, a lot more examining. This is a candidate who's not been vetted, really. In most of the debates, he's hidden in amongst the kind of 10, 12 candidates. He's not been asked about the bankruptcy bill. He's never really been probed about the Iraq war and his kind of turnaround on the Iraq war. And I just don't get why Democrats, as you pointed out to Barbara Boxer, think that you could just rerun the 2016 playbook and not think that Donald Trump will rerun his. I mean, they tried to run a pro-Iraq war, pro-Wall Street establishment Democrat with a history of dubious claims and dodgy dealings and dodgy comments about mass incarceration and super predators. Where did that end up? You know, what's the old saying? Insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results.
But what do you say?
Yes, we know how that turned out last time, and that's where the Bernie or bust, Bernie or Trump swing voters come in. We aren't going to vote for Joe Biden. Period. This piece by Haley Miller from the HuffPost is also relevant today. Representative Tim Ryan, Joe Biden is declining, demonstrates lack of clarity. We can't just put somebody up there who can't beat Donald Trump, said the long-shot Democratic presidential hopeful. And even though it's from September, it suffices to say that he's still correct. Tim Ryan on Saturday doubled down on comments he made last week, claiming fellow Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden is declining and lacks the energy needed to beat President Donald Trump in 2020. Ryan told CNN's Arlette Sens that he wasn't backtracking when she asked him to clarify remarks he made to a Bloomberg reporter on Thursday. "It is a concern you're hearing from a lot of people in the country," Ryan said at the New Hampshire Democratic Party convention, referring to the former vice president's campaign. "I'm just saying that it's unclear sometimes. When Biden is articulating positions, there's a lack of clarity, and I'll leave it at that." Frederica Whitfield of CNN also grilled him about his dig at Biden in a subsequent interview Saturday, noting that Trump has suggested the Democratic frontrunner's mental agility is waning. "Are your comments kind of in step with what the president is saying about Biden?" Whitfield asked. "Well, let me just say that I think President Trump is declining," Ryan responded. "He's very forgetful. He's not as sharp. He's lost a lot in the last couple of years." I'm almost sure he's talking about Biden there and not Trump. Ryan added that he's been hearing on the ground that people are at times concerned by Biden's lack of clarity. "We've got to make sure that we send someone to take down Donald Trump who can articulate a very clear vision for the country in a very forceful and firm way and do it in all 50 states all over the country," Ryan said. Whitfield pressed Ryan to be more specific, asking whether the long-shot Democratic presidential contender was worried about Biden's age. At 76, Biden is 30 years older than Ryan. Ryan pointed to Biden's appearance on The Late Show last week, during which host Stephen Colbert grilled him about his gaffes on the campaign trail and asked him point blank whether he was going nuts. Biden assured him he is not. "It's not like I said something that a lot of people aren't thinking, or he wouldn't have went on Colbert to talk about it," Ryan told Whitfield. "So this is an issue. We have to be honest with each other. There's so much at stake in this election. We can't just put somebody up there who can't beat Donald Trump, whether it's on the issues or on the issues of energy or lack of clarity. What I want to know, Normie Dems, is if you actually care about whether Biden is losing his marbles or not. And then I have to ask you, do you even care that he's absolutely poised to lose to Donald Trump for a variety of reasons? And again, do you care? Would you rather have Trump? Or would you rather have Bernie? The choice is yours, not ours. It isn't up to the Bernie or bust folks or the Bernie or Trump folks. It's up to you to decide, because it's going to be either Bernie or Trump. And if that isn't enough, there is another course of action that true leftists can take, the ones that we are talking about earlier who haven't been listened to. Well, if they don't listen to us in Milwaukee, there's still another step after Milwaukee and during Milwaukee. I mentioned this organization briefly yesterday, burnthednc.org, spelled with an E, burn with an E, burnthednc.org. They rigged the primary, we shut them down. You can sign up at burnthednc.org to participate in lawful civil disobedience. And I've already signed up. I urge the rest of my followers to do the same. I've also urged you to get your lodging now and see if you can find a good deal before it's too late, because I have a feeling there are going to be a lot of human beings in Milwaukee in July, and I urge all of us to be there too. You can find my Facebook contact information in the information section below this video. I urge you to contact me directly, and let's see if we can coordinate our protest efforts in Milwaukee. After you sign up to lawfully protest, make sure you share the fact that you're going to do so with your Facebook, Twitter, other Instagram following friends. Let them all know that we're serious about this. And in addition to sharing the word about that, also share the word that you've taken the Bernie or Bust pledge. Go to BernieOrBust2020.us if you haven't yet taken the pledge, BernieOrBust2020.us, and make sure your friends know you've done that as well. That two-pronged pugilistic approach, I believe, will avail much. I think there's still time to scare the normie suburban Democrats into voting for Bernie in the primaries. They're not used to being forced this way. Although the leftists have always been forced in this way, they're not used to it. They will protest. They may even unfriend you. But you can live with that, dear viewers and listeners. You can live with that. There's a lot at stake, and the time to act is right now.
Get on board the Bernie or Bust train. Come get on board the Bernie or Bust train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Oh, get on board the Bernie or Bust train.
The preceding episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.